Appreciate you nonetheless.
What is up, everybody? I am not Tommy Ashley. I'm also not John Bauman. I'm Joey Powell here filling in. I mean, they've gotten to the third string quarterback to host this episode of On the Beat. We're glad you're with us. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Everybody who's here, if you have not yet, as my man Sean Crowley is always quick to say, and I'm grateful for it, make sure you smash that like button. Subscribe if you have not. Make sure you get all of this Inside Carolina goodness directly to your feeds. And y'all, I'm not the one you're here to hear. First off, you didn't know I was going to be here. And if you're showing up expecting Tommy or John, God bless you. I'm sorry. This is what you got to work with. But we've got the usual three kings of On the Beat: Jeremiah Holloway, Adam Smith, and Evan Rogers. Fellas, I am so glad that you're here. There's a lot to talk about. First things first, before we get rolling, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard is the sky falling right now? Jeremiah.
How hard is the sky falling, man? I don't know. Well, honestly, I
Right
might
out of
say,
the chute.
yeah, for real. I'm gonna say it too, just because like that we have at inside Carolina. All these teams talk about we have depth, but you don't know until your main guys go down. And so, as you can see, we got another podcast. So I think we're doing all right. We're a little tired. We've been sitting on planes for 5 days, me and Adam, but I think all things considered, I think we're okay.
Well, I know that you talking about depth. There's going to be immediately somebody that shows up and says, "Well, at least Ben Sherman's using his depth." Evan Rogers, give me a 1 to 10. How much is the sky falling right now? With 1 being meh, 10 being clouds hitting you in the head.
You talking for me personally, or like UNC basketball?
Just UNC basketball. No, nobody cares about you personally, Evan. We're talking about talking about the season here.
I was gonna say, I've got 2 midterms up next week, so I'd consider myself a solid 6 right now. UNC basketball, I would say. I mean, I'd say it's a 4 right now, 3 or 4. I think there is a little bit of cause for concern about these couple of losses, but it's nothing that. I mean, they're not going to miss the tournament or anything like that. So I'd say a 3.
We'll get into the elaboration here in a second. Adam, same question to you, man. Scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you've got bird droppings right up close to that crop of yours.
Yeah, it's not much coverage up there either for the bird droppings. I'm going to go about a 5 or a 6. I mean, I don't know if I'm hot taking the hell out of this, but I don't know. Like, I think we all need to calm down a little bit. With that said, but I think there are some things, some cracks in the armor from the team that looked like a number 1 seed. Certainly they could still be a number 1 seed. Certainly they can still win the ACC. They're still in first place. Jeremiah and I were there the other night in the Dome, and it's loud as heck. And I'm sitting there trying to hack away at the keyboard. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not going to be in first place in the ACC anymore. Little did I know Pitt was beating Virginia at Virginia. Because I was kind of locked into what was going there. But I was like, well, they're not first place anymore. Well, UNC's still in first place. But I do think I think there's cause for concern. Now, I think you got 4 out of the next 5 games at home. I think they need, as the show was titled, I think they need some home cooking. And after UNC plays Virginia Tech on Saturday, they catch the midweek bye finally. They have a week off. You would think that would be good for this team, because I feel like, and we've talked about it, I feel like they've looked a little tired at the end of these games. You can take the sort of the crunch time numbers. You know how you can spin numbers any way you want them, Joey. I don't know if you guys do that with views or impressions or whatever, the Coast to Coast crew. But, some of the numbers aren't great for the way they finished these games. Even the Miami win was as, wobbly as heck. So I think some of these guys need a rest, on some of these guys. And, I certainly think they can get hot and hold on and win the league, but I'll say 5 or 6.
I love the fact that you rated the highest number, then told everybody they needed to chill out. That's because you have, when you're on the microphone, you can say whatever you want to. I think it's obvious that, this last 3 out of 5 game loss stretch has shaken some folks, and it is, who knows if it's shaking the team. So let's go on right into it. Give me your quote from this past week and tell me what's jumped out at you from talking to the guys, whether it be media availability or talking to them, post game. I'll let you stay here.
Well, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna throw a skip past Jeremiah because I fear I've got the same quote as Jeremiah. And
That's knowing your teammates. I love that. That's knowing where your teammates might be, and I appreciate it. That's a veteran move, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. That's very kind of you to say, first of all. And look, hey, I would never not want to be all about the team, Jeremiah. You know that. So I think this, because I was thinking about it, and I know when we heard it, both of our proverbial ears went up like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm gonna let Jeremiah go. And if it's duplicate, I don't have a backup. I'll just expound on it. So go for it, Jeremiah.
Honestly, I'd be slightly surprised if Adam has my quote, only because I honestly don't know where Adam's going. I really don't. I kind of found mine. I'm not going to say last minute, but this is one I just kind of thought. This is one that I thought was interesting, just all things considered. So I'm actually going to go to I guess a quote unquote more, I guess, positive moment that UNC had with their win against Miami. This was a game that RJ Davis, who obviously is leading the ACC in scoring, having the season that he's having, potentially All-American type season, he actually had to buckle down on the defensive side of the ball. So he was guarding Nigel Pack, Miami's second leading scorer, and he was actually torching him on Saturday in the first half. So he kind of had to buckle down a little bit. So the quote that I have RJ Davis down for, the first part of it is, I felt like Leaky a little bit. And I thought that was funny because obviously Leaky Black is a long time perimeter defender, for North Carolina. And you don't necessarily think of RJ Davis on that caliber of defense. But to continue the quote, he later says, I think it's all heart. It's about if you want it or not, and I want it. I take the challenge and pride of being the best defensive player that I know I can be. It's hard to score 25 points and chase the best player around, but a lot of great players that have come through here and even at the next level do it. So I feel like, why can't I? And end quote. So the reason I picked that one is because, if you are, striving to be All-American caliber player, have an All-American caliber season, for a lot of guys that is on both ends of the ball. I'm not the biggest advanced stats guy, but I will say for the sake of argument, RJ's defensive rating is like very slightly the lowest he's had it. But I think part of your defensive rating, it might be like, I think part of it is like the team defense. So like when you do lose a player to the caliber of Leaky Black, your overall like on-court team defense kind of, is going to take a little bit of a dip. But this is a team, and you have to remember also, Seth Trimble was out in this game. So this was a game where you're having to make up for obviously what you lost last year defensively, but then also Seth Trimble, who has been your best perimeter defender this year, you're missing out on him. He's somebody that could have slowed down Pack early on in that game. So I thought one of the underrated stories, and I know Adam did too, because we were kind of talking about this after the game. But I think probably an underrated story of that game was RJ Davis and what he was doing in the second half defensively. Funny enough, RJ actually did say, I didn't even put this in here, he actually did say he thought his own defense this year was like an underrated part of his game that he had developed. And so that was the quote that I decided to go with.
Love that. I think folks will also look at RJ Davis's advanced metrics and realize that I don't know that he's ever been the guy that North Carolina has put on another team's best ball handler. And I think that might affect those numbers a little bit too. I love that. Evan, what do you got? Same question. Hit me with your quote or anecdote from this past week.
Yeah, kind of sticking on along the lines of defense. I thought this was an interesting quote from Cormac after the Syracuse game. So obviously Syracuse shot over 60%. I think it was around 63, maybe just a tick under. But Cormac went on and talked about just the overall, defensive, I guess, mindset that maybe has shifted a little bit within this team. And he said, I think we need to step up our pride on defense, our want to. A lot of that is things that we can control. Guys are going to make tough shots, but it's not going to, and it's going to happen, especially on the road. You live with those, but you can't live with 63% of those. They made some tough shots, but they weren't all tough shots. And I just think that's an important, I guess, mindset to have just about that Syracuse game. Because, yeah, you can point to a couple of those, JJ Starling banking in a deep three or hitting the three off a curl. I mean, there were some tough shots that those guys hit, but you're not going to get to 63% by shooting just tough shots. And in their recent losses, a common thread that you can see is in five of UNC's 6 losses this year, an opponent has scored 80 or more points. The only loss was Georgia Tech. That was the lone exception. And UNC has only won 2 games where they've allowed an opponent to score over 80 points. That was Duke at home and Tennessee at home. So I think, the writing right there is kind of on the wall with the formula that this team has to live by in order to win games. This is not your Kentuckys of the world in terms of offense that can just rack up 100 points on any given night. They're capable of it, but that's not something that I think you want to live off of. And you kind of saw that when they had that 10-game win streak. Those 10 wins were by their defense. I mean, they were winning games in the 60s and the 50s and the low 70s. So I think that's kind of what you've seen these last 5 games, in that they've kind of gone away from their collective defensive intensity or fundamentals. And I don't know if that's a combination of, better team scouting or shot luck, or even like Adam had said, there's maybe a little bit of a fatigue factor. I mean, if you look at this schedule, it seems like they've been on the road a ton. I mean, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know a couple weeks back, it's like they'd only played like 4 home games in like 50 days or something ridiculous. So this is just a team that I think needs not only a reset at home, but just a reset in general. And that's going to come after Saturday. And I think that's where they can kind of get back to what was working for them a month ago. And that was kind of taking your pride on the defensive end and building off of that on your offensive side.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a couple of really important points there, in the sense that I do think teams have film on Carolina now. They've gone through the first half of the season. You know how it always works. The second time playing somebody is always the toughest. And then you think about trying to beat somebody for the second time, which they're looking at, the example of Clemson. It's hard to beat anybody, especially if they are a good team. And I still think Clemson's a bit of a matchup problem for North Carolina. But anytime you see a team for the second time, it is going to be tough. I think you laid out a couple of great points there, Evan. And also, add to Adam's point and one that you just refreshed. When you've got fatigue, I think Seth Trimble's injury came at the worst time, because North Carolina was on the back end of a lot of quick turnarounds, on the back end of a lot of travel, and also he was one of the players. He was one of the players in a position that it makes it incredibly difficult for North Carolina to be able to run more bodies out there, because they don't have a lot of Hubert Davis's trusted guys that they can put out here. I think you touched on a lot of really good points there, man. Adam, did Jeremiah steal your quote, or you still have one left in the chamber?
He absolutely did. I knew it was going to happen. How much are we allowed to pat ourselves on the back, Joey, since you're running the point here? Is there patting? Can we pat ourselves on the back?
Hey,
TA will let us do whatever. It's
you
like
know the drill.
Substitute
Substitute teacher, man, anything goes. So as long as you don't rip your shoulder out of socket, you have at it, brother.
Jeremy Sharp of the UNC football will do that if I say something that, I like bragging a little bit, which I need. But the leaky thing, when RJ said I felt like leaky a little bit, you know me. I mean, I was like all about it. The patting on the back was my question. Because we were sitting there watching the game, and you've almost become predisposed to expect RJ Davis to score 20 points, which he did. He scored 25 points in that game. What was his line, Evan? I think he had like 7 rebounds and 5 assists too. Something like that. But we're sitting there watching it. Pack had gone for 18 in the first half and hit 4 threes. Carolina couldn't guard him. And Omier was, a damn raging bull at the rim too, as we all know. But as we're watching that second half, I was thinking, man, I mean, think about this. My whole general thought was how much energy it takes to score 25 points in a college basketball game, a high school game, whatever. It takes a lot of energy to score 25 points. Well, he's on the other end chasing Pack. Pack's like slaloming through those screens and stuff like he's on skis. I mean, I think it's interesting to talk about RJ Davis's defensive metrics. He's not UNC's best perimeter defender by a long shot. Those guys are Seth Trimble and Cormac Ryan. RJ Davis, in many ways, is a defensive liability because he's so small. But what he did in Miami was he just poured it out. Like Jim Hawkins, the legendary Jim Hawkins, our photographer, has a great shot of just RJ's hair flying as he's trying to keep up with Pack in the second half. And I think Pack only made one shot. I think he scored 2 points in the second half. So that's where I was going. And I thought it was interesting that RJ, you asked him about his defense, which we don't ask him about a lot. And he goes, as Jeremiah said, I think that's an underrated part of my game. And I had posed the energy question to him, and he said, I think it was heart. He was sort of telling us what we saw. He wasn't slapping the floor and locking down somebody like Leaky, like they relied on Leaky to do, but he just poured it all out there. And to what Evan just said, to piggyback off of that about Cormac and saying, we sort of had to have more want to. This was after Cormac Ryan played 40 minutes at Syracuse. He didn't come out. And he's saying we need more want to. And he played every second. So anyway, those were my ideas. I do have some anecdotes, Joey. I don't want to hog it, but when we get to the anecdotes, I do have some anecdotes about the scene at Miami, and it's got to do with Cormac. It's got to do with a shooter that you and I, guys of our age, Joey, idolized. And it also has to do with a former UNC great who's known in South Florida. So I don't know if that's a tease in the business or what.
No. I'm going to let you go ahead and take this rather than making the folks wait around. I know that there's still some scar tissue when you start talking about South Florida and North Carolina, and people start thinking about getting the tenant rate and Marvin Austin and bad tweets. But
oh my word,
I'm hoping this is not where you're going. So please, Mr. Smith, take it away with your anecdote.
That is a deep cut. Much respect. The Young Bucks going to have to Google that. They don't. I don't know if Evan was born yet. Well, what a nerd I am. So we're going out to the court at Miami at the Watsco Center in Coral Gables, and we're walking out there before the start of the game, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a tall man in front of me, and he's moving slow, but he's moving pretty cool, and I'm like, geez, that's Glenn Rice. So walked out to the court behind Glenn Rice, the former Charlotte Hornet, the former Miami Heat sharpshooter, University of Michigan.
That dude was a bucket, by the way. But please continue.
But it's like you don't expect. I wasn't expecting to see Glenn Rice on Saturday afternoon. You know what I mean? Like he was eating popcorn. He was just as cool as he could be. And interestingly enough, he's going up to where we're sitting, to where the rest of the nerds are sitting in the media seating, and he plops down right beside Bob freaking McAdoo. So
wow.
Yeah.
Is he still an executive for the Heat? I know Bob was an executive for the Heat for a while. Is he still down there?
I think he has retired. He's in his 70s now.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was with the Miami Heat for a long time. He's one of Pat Riley's right-hand men, for a long time. Used to have the glasses sitting up on his forehead when he was on the bench with Pat Riley. But it was just super cool. Just like, first of all, if I'm fangirling about Glenn Rice, I'm just like, oh my God, Glenn Rice. I could think about one of my best friends in college. Every time he played him, I think it was NBA Live, he would go, it's not rain, it's grain, Rice. Every time he would hit a three or something. And then you see Bob McAdoo. These guys, they couldn't have been any cooler. And they watched the game together. I assume both were doing some sort of scouting, I would think. But that was cool. And the last little sort of behind the scenes look behind the curtain was when we were talking to RJ, when we were talking to Armando, when we were talking to Elliot after the game in South Florida, Cormac Ryan was face down on, I don't know what you would call it, like a massage table type. It was a padded table that you sit, like you would go to the doctor's office and sit on to get checked out. He's not sitting there like swinging his legs like you do when you're a kid. He's face down right outside the locker room. And he's just getting worked on by Doug Halverson, UNC's head athletic trainer, Jonas Saratian, their strength and conditioning coach. So we're doing these interviews, and the guys are coming out to talk to us, narrow hallway, and they're going by Cormac, who is just making noises in pain. So, I think that's sort of a peek into, he's had the ankle injury that occurred in the Bahamas, and it has recurred. It's been recurring. And he's 25 years old. God bless him. I think it was sort of a peek into what he is going through to play these minutes. They were working on him hard. and he was grunting, and some of it looked quite painful, especially someone who is not limber like myself. But it was it was an interesting little thing. I personally would love to ask Cormac about it. Cormac's not the greatest interview. I think if you asked Armando or RJ or Harrison Ingram, they would just tell you everything. Cormac's a little, sometimes he's just would rather just leave and go see his parents, which I can understand. But those were sort of.
Well, I mean,
Go ahead.
He's getting up there where it's time to start dealing with back injuries because my man's been playing forever. And listen, as you guys all kind of alluded to a little bit in your first quotes, this is the time of year where just about everybody's got some sort of little niggle, right? Like they've got something that's causing issues. You got something that's kind of creeping up on, or maybe popping back up, like you said with Ryan's ankle. It's kind of just that time of year, and as you said earlier, that week off that they're going to get after the Virginia Tech game really could not be at a better time. Either one of you other two guys got an anecdote for us that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I suppose I can go ahead and go second. I'm glad Adam went the McAdoo route. Yeah, that was cool because I actually grew up watching a lot of Miami Heat. I grew up a Miami Heat fan or whatever. So like if I remember correctly, on Saturday, Glenn Rice had not Glenn Rice, McAdoo, I think he had either a Miami Heat like hat or a shirt on. I remember him wearing some sort of Miami Heat gear. And I also remember him being at the Fort Lauderdale airport when we got off. So we actually saw him the day before, and Ryan McAdoo, also former UNC forward, was also in the building. So good stuff. Actually, Glenn Rice is funny, and I'm going to just real quick before I get to mine. Me and our intern Jalen Harrell, we were at an arcade for the IC get together. So I actually played with the Hornets and Glenn Rice against Jalen, in the on the NBA Jam. They had the NBA Jam,
man.
Yep. Yeah, so not gonna expose who may or may not have won or may not have lost that game, but I did pretty well. But yeah, my anecdote from the week is actually going to be on the other side, I guess, of the East Coast. We were covering obviously that Syracuse game, in which UNC ended up on the short side of. So me, Adam Smith, and Jim Hawkins, per our custom, were among the last to leave the press room. And so before we go outside, we actually go back to the Carrier Dome, quote unquote, court. You couldn't really call it a court at that point because they had taken the court part off as if it was never there. And we go, and it's all this grass. It's all this grass, and they're actually working on the field because I guess lacrosse was going to play either the next day or the day after that or something. And it was kind of a funny scene because the two basketball goals were actually still on the field. So they hadn't actually gotten rid of the goals yet. So it's just two basketball goals randomly on this football field. And you see the entire field, things like that. And so we go back, and then we can even see the press room that we were in, I guess, was either the visitors locker room or the home locker room. So we actually walk, back around there. And as we're going outside, we could see, a different setup for the lacrosse post-game press conference and stuff. So it's a much smaller setup. And then finally, when we get outside, it was snowing. It was snowing outside, and it snowed all over us. It wasn't heavy snow, but it was obviously freezing cold, and it was consistently just going at you. It was very windy, so it probably felt like more than it actually was. The roads were, the roads weren't terrible, but you could see it. I mean, it's just a ton of snow, on the grass, in the parking lot. When we got to the parking lot, I was like, man, we're gonna have to be kind of careful, getting out of here. Fortunately, our rental car was pretty big, so that was that was a positive. But I mean, the stuff that I'm wearing, it's just snow all over it. And keep in mind, I don't remember what it did last year, in North Carolina, but my year last year, I was in South Carolina the whole time. It never snows in South Carolina, so I really hadn't seen snow in about 2 years. So I got out there and I was like, oh, this is a thing. This is on Earth. This happens sometimes. So yeah, we did end up getting some New York snow. The morning after as well, it actually snowed again a little bit before he went to the airport. So yeah, just a very interesting, experience for us, packing for, Miami and Syracuse at the same time, because we went straight from Miami to Syracuse in the same span of a few days. So just a very interesting, experience. Adam had kind of talked earlier in the year, just like on some of these trips, about I can't remember where he went. It was like Pittsburgh to somewhere, right? Where you had to like pack for 2 different climates. It was something like that. What was
San Diego to Pittsburgh.
San Diego? Yeah.
Holiday Bowl to the basketball game last
Holiday
year.
Bowl, yeah. So I had a slight taste of that as well. So just thought it was a funny dynamic going from obviously all the way down here to all the way up there.
I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there that
you Syracuse moment for Jeremiah.
Yeah, I was going to figure he probably did not wear his guayabera when he was in Syracuse. All right, Evan, do you have an anecdote for us?
Yeah, I've got a quick one. So I was not on the road with the two fine gentlemen that have spoke, but I did have the pleasure this weekend to take a weekend-long class at the business school, which was 9 to 5 from Friday to Sunday. And on Saturday, that obviously interfered with the start of the basketball game at 4:00. We were still in class till 5. And I was in the front row, not by choice. I may or may have not showed up a little bit late to the first day of this class. So I kind of got pushed up into the front row for the whole weekend. And right around 4:00, professor kind of hints that she is aware that there's a game going on at the same time of class, and says that if we can multitask, that she does not care if the game is on or off our phone or laptop. And by this point, I had pretty much been watching basketball all day once noon came around, just to kind of help the time go by. But once the UNC game started, I thought something that was kind of funny was I could hear voices behind me being like, was that Elliot Cadeau? Oh, I think that's Harrison Ingram who just made that. Was that RJ Davis? And I turn around and there are like 5 kids who have all squeezed in next to each other and are just looking at my laptop screen that has the game on. Which I thought was
you're an enabler, Evan. You've become the class enabler. Folks actually who paid for a great weekend of business learning suffered greatly because of your delinquency and your willingness to share your technology with them.
Evan was all about business that weekend. I mean, that was Evan's
absolutely.
Business, so
it was a great class. Ended with a good grade. Final grades came out earlier today. It all went well, but and also she let us out early. She let us out right at around the under 12 timeout, right when the commercials were hitting. I didn't know if that was intentional on her part or not, but that worked out well, so I could drive home and not miss any of the game. But I kind of felt like the when the teacher rolls in the TV for the ACC tournament, that's kind of my moment, being the TV with my laptop. So just kind of my little side moment.
Don't patronize Adam and I here. You never were in a class where they rolled a TV in. Adam and I were in a class where they rolled a TV. You have never seen a TV on a cart, sir. Do not pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Okay?
Well, yeah, the TV was already in the room. That's a good point. When I was in elementary school, the TV was already up there.
Don't you dare try to editorialize and rewrite the memories of the childhood that Adam Smith and I had. Boys, let's take a little bit of a turn here. This is a topic that I think a lot of folks will definitely be looking towards. I've already seen it mentioned in the chat a little bit tonight, but one of the things that I think is going to be keenly in the eyes of some viewers and North Carolina fans is that one Tyler Nickel will be coming down from Blacksburg to play in the Smith Center this weekend when UNC hosts Virginia Tech. And I think the hypothetical that the teacher left in our lesson plans for me to go over with y'all today is just considering, what if UNC hadn't turned the roster over? And so we can kind of popcorn this around a little bit, and we can debate, the goods and bads and the indifference. But before we start, I'll give you some context. Just looking at the stats of the major guys that left, I don't think you can consider Justin McCoy or Puff Johnson, though Justin McCoy is playing really well on the Big Island in Hawaii. you got to tip your cap to him for making the most shrewd transfer in the history of all transfers. But let's look at Dontrez Styles, transferred to Georgetown. He's averaging a fair amount of play. He's starting for them most games. He's averaging 13.5 points, a little under 6 rebounds, and about 1 assist per game. He's shooting 42% from the floor. The aforementioned Tyler Nickel is at Virginia Tech. I don't know that he's starting, but he's playing. He's played just about every game for them. He's averaging 24 minutes. He is averaging 9 points a game, 2 rebounds, and a little over 1 assist. He's shooting 45% from the field. DeMarco Dunn, who would probably have been helpful this past week for North Carolina, just with regard to some perimeter depth while Seth Trimble was injured. He has played he's played in 25 games for Penn State, averaging 18 minutes a game. That's about 8 minutes more than he was averaging last year in Chapel Hill. 7 points, 2 rebounds, and a little over half of an assist. Shooting 40% from the field. And then Caleb Love, I think, is the big fish, and he's the mercurial one that everybody, at least for the first 12 games of the season, every single announcer wanted to mention Caleb Love. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about him, but he's 56 in the country right now, averaging 18.9 points a game at Arizona. He's playing every game. He's averaging less minutes, so his usage has gone down a little bit. 5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, and he's shooting 43% from the field, which is almost a full 6 points above what he was shooting in North Carolina last year. So you wonder if his usage rate maybe hasn't helped the fact that he's not being used as much and relied on as much to carry the load in Arizona. So, boys, what I'll do is I'll tee up to the three of you. Knowing what we've seen about these players that left for various reasons, went to different pastures. I won't say greener pastures, but different pastures. How do you think things would have looked had some of these players stayed? And let's start right now with Tyler Nickel, since he's the one everybody's thinking about this week. I think the typical North Carolina fan is scar tissued up as they are, is probably assuming he's going to come in and go full Harold Arsenault and light North Carolina up for 35 points. I don't know that that's going to happen, but he is a shooter, and shooters shoot. Jeremiah, how do you feel like any of those guys, and you can start with Nickel if you'd like, how do you feel like any of those guys would have fit had they stuck around? Or is this one of those things where you can't really consider one of them without considering all of them?
I think it's the latter. I think if the guys that left would have stayed, they probably would have the same role that they had they stayed. Because you look at Dontrez Styles and DeMarco Dunn. Those guys were there for 2 years. And for 2 years, they didn't get a lot of playing time off the bench. Buff Johnson was there for 3 years. And for 3 years, he didn't get a lot of time off the bench. Nickel, he had his 1 year. And then Caleb Love obviously started alongside RJ Davis for 3 years. And, you had it was an interesting dynamic. Obviously, both of those guys are talented players and talented scorers. But it's kind of like, they kind of needed to exist independently of each other. Like, it's almost like you had more than one team out there when both of those guys were kind of out there. Like, Caleb Love was playing his own game and RJ was playing his own game. And when they're converting shots, obviously that works really well. So it's no knock to those guys at all, but it's just a matter of like the way that they were being used. I don't know that based on the evidence we have, they would have been used any differently, had they chose to stay. Now, what I will say is this, a guy like a Tyler Nickel, he's been proven like he's probably going to matter a good bit on Saturday, because he's averaging, it's like 41% from 3. He's played 23 games. He scored double digits in 12 of the 23 games. So he's going to matter on Saturday. So obviously those guys were quality players. I just don't think they necessarily fit what Hubert Davis was trying to do. And then one point, I'm not trying to, hog this obviously too much, but even just something as like, if you look at Elliot Cadeau, like he's probably not here if Caleb Love stays, because yes, he was signed on, but he reclassed to come a year early. So you wouldn't have a true point guard on this team. Like you wouldn't have really, obviously, because the way this team functions right now, RJ Davis is like effectively like the backup point guard, because Cadeau starts at point, but when he's out, RJ Davis is the point guard. So Seth is really like your backup like guard, if that makes sense. Like he's kind of a 2 and a 3, kind of a cross between a 2 and a 3. So I don't know. I think a lot of the changes just kind of were necessary for both parties involved. For the players that left and they're putting up better numbers, like Caleb Love's having a great year. And then also for obviously for Hubert Davis and the type of team that he wants to run. So I think it would be very similar had a lot of those guys stayed. And so I think the fact that they did overhaul the roster, it just made sense for really everybody involved.
Adam, you got anything you want to add?
Oh, I could go a long time, Joey. I'll try to here. Just give me the time. Give me the Sandman. Sweep me off the stage if you need to. I think this is a fascinating question that John Bowman came up with. I hadn't even thought about it. I personally, I hope we can talk to Tyler Nickel after the game Saturday. I would love to talk to him.
You just want to hear his really, really deep voice so he can talk to you into the tape recorder and you can feel like you've got some extra man in you, right?
I about fell out of my chair when I heard him talk for the first time. It was simply amazing. It was wild. I thought I was going to have to put Ross Martin in a seatbelt when Tyler Nickel opened up his mouth and started laying it down like Barry White or James Earl Jones. This Caleb Love is going to be the Pac-12 Player of the Year, probably. RJ Davis, I would say, is the front runner for ACC Player of the Year, probably. These are interesting dynamics at work here. For whatever reason, after covering this team, when they made that run to the national championship game in 2022, I, for better or worse, just became the biggest believer in Caleb Love. I saw him beat UCLA. I saw what he did against Duke in the Final Four. As many times as I saw him go 4 for 14 or 2 for 12 last season, I still thought this guy's going to get hot. But with that said, I think that it just, for UNC's purposes, they just had they needed a fresh start. They just needed it. It had to happen. And I think as Jeremiah rolled off the numbers and as you rolled off the numbers, Joey, I think beyond that, the chemistry just needed to hit the reset button. And what they got with Harrison Ingram, and I know Cormac has been sort of a whipping boy for good reason in some cases, but what they got with Cormac, those two guys are the leaders of this team. The leaders of the team are not Armando Bacot and RJ Davis, although they serve leadership roles. The voices of this UNC basketball team are Cormac Ryan, a two-time transfer, and Harrison Ingram, who was playing at Stanford last year. That's just how it is. Armando, it just is not the guy to sort of like get in guys' faces and get into them.
Adam, I think there's. I'm sorry to step on you, but I think something you kind of touched on briefly. I think there's something also to be said when you mention the attitudes of Ingram and Ryan. I think there's something also to be said for players who have not experienced success, right? And I think that might be kind of a driving force as to why those two guys are able to rally the troops, having only been here for a few months.
Yeah, we were talking about it, I think, with the Duke game and how much you just knew Harrison Ingram wanted to play on that stage. Yeah. He wanted it. He wanted that moment. That's one of the reasons he transferred here, to play in a game like the Duke game, to get to an NCAA tournament. And just to on the transfer topic, not to crap on Dontrez Styles, because I think he's a nice player, but I think some of those numbers, a lot of those numbers he's putting up are somewhat hollow. That's a really bad Georgetown team.
That's a bad team. Yes.
I think they're 1-12 in the Big East.
And their losses, they've got some really just skull dragging losses. If you look at their schedule, it's not been pretty for those guys.
I think Jalen Withers is a good player. I personally think he should be getting more minutes. I thought that when UNC was in that 10-game winning streak, and he was really coming. He had a great game against Louisville. He had some other really nice games. We were talking to him after these games because he was playing well. After BC, we talked to him, and then he goes 6 games without making a shot because he really wasn't playing that much. And so what I'm trying to say is, with Dontrez, with Puff, where would Jalen Withers be ahead of them? I don't know if Jalen Withers would have come if those guys stepped.
Right.
Right. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg. But I do think that if they hadn't flipped the roster, there would have been times this year where you would have had, what was it they shot against Pitt last year, like 5 for 31 from 3, where
Yeah.
people just wanted to pull the rest of their hair out.
Yes.
And you would just be like, why are we doing this again? I think Hubert Davis got to a point in that staff that said, we're not going to do this again. And that's why you saw happen what happened.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said also for a player like Withers, and this is based on nothing but just watching him and a gut feel. I think Withers is a flow of the game guy. I think he's his most effective when he gets extended minutes for between 4 and 8 minutes a clip, rather than 2 minutes here, go sit, 3 minutes there, go sit. 'Cause he's such a good cutter, and that's from Hubert Davis's words. He's such a good cutter that it takes a minute for him to realize what the defense has given him. I'm with you, Adam. I would like to see Withers get a little bit more time. And even against Syracuse, while he was in, he did give him 4 points and a couple of rebounds, I believe. Don't quote me on the rebound side. Evan, is there anything else that you see in this kind of ex-girlfriend conversation that we're looking at right now with guys that left and the guys that came in?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing when you dive into transfers as a whole, I'm going to go here really quick before talking about one guy, is a lot of it is more of fit than how good the individual player is sometimes. I know a lot of people want to do all these transfer rankings, and when you look back at some of the transfer rankings, you're like, how is this guy rated really highly? Give you an example, Pete Nance last year. I mean, that was a guy who came in and was pretty much a consensus top 5, top 10 transfer guy in the portal, and obviously did not pan out. And that was more, I think, fit is what you're kind of seeing, because Pete Nance has played in the NBA. Brady Manick, when he committed to UNC, was not this top 10 consensus transfer guy. And obviously everyone knows how it turned out for him, and he has not played in the NBA. So it kind of just gets to the point of, when you want to look at transfers, a lot of it is more fit than the individual talent. And when I look at the guys who left UNC last year, I look at Caleb Love. I think that's a great fit for him out in Arizona with Tommy Lloyd. I think that's a good personality he needs to be around. I just think that's a coach that can kind of work against what he brings to the table. And I think that's why you're seeing the year that Caleb Love's having. I mean, I think there's a legitimate chance, as crazy as this might sound, that Caleb Love and RJ Davis could be potentially competing for the same first-team All-American spot, which I think would be fascinating.
That's absolutely insane. Yes.
You look at Dontrez Styles, you guys kind of already mentioned this. I don't know if he would fit with this team's roster, because if he stays, does Harrison Ingram come? I mean, that'd be an interesting argument to have, because I don't think Dontrez would expect in his third year to come off the bench. And I really think the only guy that UNC lost to the portal that maybe they wish they did have this year in terms of depth is I could potentially see a spot for DeMarco Dunn as your 8th, 9th guy, instead of maybe having Paxson Wojcik be that guy. I think for the most part, everyone can kind of agree that Paxson Wojcik has been somewhat of a miss in the portal. Not to the point where I think it alters the ceiling of this year's team, but I mean, if you had told me Paxson Wojcik on February 15th had less 3-pointers made than Jalen Washington and Elliot Cadeau, I would say that probably was not a successful portal addition. So I think DeMarco is maybe the only one, but again, like Jeremiah had brought up, I mean, you're talking about a guy who was a 2-year player at UNC, had struggled to get consistent minutes, was a consensus mid-high 4-star guy coming out of college or coming out of high school. And I'm sure he wanted to get in a new place where he could potentially start. And he's had that opportunity at Penn State. He's started a couple games. So I think as a whole, when you just look back on the overhaul that was done this offseason, I think it was necessary. I think for the most part, you can probably say they hit on pretty much all the transfers they brought in for the most part. I think maybe Paxson's a miss. And James Okonkwo is an interesting transfer, because I'm sure if the whole situation with Huggins doesn't go down, I'm sure James Okonkwo is probably still at West Virginia.
But Evan, I'd challenge you a little bit on the Paxson Wojcik thing. It's not that I'm caping up for him as a player as much as, and the only reason I'm saying this, I'm going to do a little show crossover here. When he transferred in, one of the things that we talked about with Sherelle on Coast to Coast was that he wasn't going to come in and start. He was going to come in and be an energy guy and potentially help stretch the floor if they needed a 3-point shooter. So to your point about him not making a ton of threes, I think that's spot on. But I don't know. Yeah, even then, I don't think anybody would have thought him to come in and be like this, this impact guy. But I hear what you're saying, and I think you're you're going in the right direction there. I would pump the brakes a little bit and say Paxson isn't necessarily a hit just because maybe the expectations for him are different. But Adam, you had something you wanted to add?
I just think about this all the time with Caleb Love, but also we're talking about Paxson Wojcik. He hit Carolina's first 3-pointer this season. Evan and I have talked about it a lot, crunching the numbers. Like the first 2 offensive possessions of this basketball season were a Paxson Wojcik feed to Armando Bacot for a dunk and a Paxson Wojcik 3. And you're like, oh, yeah, they're off and running against Radford. I only think he's hit. What has he hit? 2 more since then? Is that right?
That's a deep cut. Well, the thing is, though, I feel like the ones that he's hit have been incredibly timely. Go back to the one that he hit against Clemson. That absolutely would have totally changed the game had that bucket not gone.
It was the go-ahead 3.
Yes, it was.
He made the shot. They never trailed the rest of the game.
And that's I think that matters.
Well, yeah, it absolutely does. But the only thing I was going to say was, for whatever reason, I think about this with Caleb a lot. And I watch a ton of Pac-12 basketball. For whatever reason, I've always liked the Pac-10, the Pac-12. I always thought, I hate that the league is breaking up. I always thought it was cool, like maybe because it's a coast away for a little hayseed like myself. I don't know.
You sound like a guy that doesn't sleep a lot and loves in and out, but go ahead.
I just, I don't know. I've always thought the Pac-12 was cool. I just always have. Go back to the O'Bannon brothers and beyond,
Ooh, deep cut.
Yeah.
I like it.
But anyway, what would have happened? We wouldn't be having this discussion at all, or in Caleb's respect, what would have happened if he'd gone to Michigan? The dude had committed to go to Michigan. They are last in the Big Ten.
You wouldn't have heard a thing about him.
Right. Ohio State is better than Michigan in terms of their record. I'm pretty sure Michigan's last in the dang league.
They just fired their coach.
Yeah, they're like 8-17 overall. And so you would have these people who hate Caleb, the UNC, the continued UC fan base that, wanted him gone. And I understand that, but they would sort of be laughing at, oh, look at Caleb Love. Look at this terrible, it really worked out for him that the transfer to Michigan didn't work out, because I think he would just be in such a bad situation. I think he'd be having such a rough year. He'd probably be shooting all the time on a bad team. And I think it would be ugly. So anyway, I just think about that all the time. I'm like, good God, that guy could have been at Michigan.
Imagine him with Juwan Howard in terms of play style personalities.
That is absolutely tabloid television. And to your point, you're dead on, Adam. They have won 3 games in the Big Ten this year. That is a struggling team if you've seen anything. We're talking about, like, I made the ex-girlfriend analogy a while ago. One of the frustrating things when you think about ex-girlfriends, a lot of times they steal your shirts. When they steal your shirt, you can go to Johnny T-Shirt and get a new one and replace it. See what I'm doing there, guys? Johnny T-Shirt, sponsors of this here show and most Inside Carolina content. We are big fans of theirs. We love what they bring to the table. We love that they are willing to step up and support these Carolina fans that populate an IC subscriber base. They love Carolina as much as y'all do, and we want y'all to love them as much as we love them. Johnny T-Shirt right there on East Franklin Street. You can use your premium subscriber discounts you can find on the message boards. If you're not a premium subscriber, I've got all sorts of side-eye for you. And Johnny T-Shirt has as much selection as I have side-eye for you right now. Hit them up. Johnny T-Shirt right there on East Franklin Street. If you're going to be in town for the game on Saturday against Virginia Tech, which I know a lot of people are, those tickets right now are going for like $200 a pop on game time. Yeah, for a Saturday afternoon game. So it's going to be crowded. If you're coming to town, run into Johnny T-Shirt, tell them we said what's up, ask them for the Evan Rogers discount, and after they stop staring at you like you have a third head, then you could just use your 10% off the top from Inside Carolina. You'll be glad they did. If you're listening to us via podcast right now, the National Guys will run some ads. We'll be right back, talk a little bit more about what's coming up for the Tar Heels, and do a little ACC reset before we get out of here on The Beat. I'm Joey Powell. As always, the guys that are here, Jeremy, I'm going to call you whatever. Jeremiah Holloway, Adam Smith, and Evan Rogers are here. I told you, man, I'm just holding the clipboard tonight. This is On The Beat. These guys are the ones that cover the team and give you all the content on Inside Carolina that you're used to seeing and that you have developed an appetite for. Boys, we've talked about a lot of things so far. Before we get to some listener questions, let's look at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech. See, I'm struggling, man. It's late.
It was a
Virginia.
professional ad read, though, Joey. It was
That's
the young
why they
guys
paid me.
saw how it was done.
That's why they paid me the medium bucks. If you look towards Virginia Tech coming to town from Blacksburg, aside from what you're expecting to see from one Tyler Nickel, gentlemen, tell me what you think they're going to bring to the Tar Heels on Saturday. Jeremiah, I'll come to you first since I butchered your name a second ago.
No, it's all good. It's happened before. Now, I think what Virginia Tech brings to the table. First of all, I'm just kind of in my review, and obviously seeing him a little bit this year. It's so funny that Hunter Couture is still there. You know what I mean? Like that dude has genuinely been there forever. But not Virginia. It's so funny because like they're a solid team. Like if you look at just like their overall resume this year, so. They beat Clemson, a ranked Clemson team, like when they were on their slide. If everybody remembers the slide that Clemson kind of had before they ended up, beating UNC and things like that.
It's called January. It's January. It happens every year in Clemson.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So they have a win against Clemson during that period. They also have a very early win against Iowa State. So that's probably going to age pretty well for them later. But they also have a 34-point loss to FAU. Right, they have a 10-point loss to Duke. That's not bad, and they have an early loss to South Carolina, who ended up, kind of doing what they have been doing for for the majority, I guess, at this point of this season. But an early 2-point loss. So the point of all of that being, this is not like a a tune-up game for UNC or like a pickup game for UNC. This isn't one where you look at it and it's like, okay, they've lost 3 out of 5, but they got Virginia Tech, so maybe this isn't that type of game for them. Because Virginia Tech, they're a solid defensive team. Among ACC teams, I was looking at it earlier. If you just looked at points per game, they're 5th as far as points per game allowed. So solid defensive team, not the juggernaut that Virginia is, obviously, but solid. And they also have some shooters. They got some guys that can really fill it up from deep. I think the thing that works for UNC is something that they've seen. Like they have seen some teams that have a couple guys that can fill it up, and for the most part, UNC has been winning those games. So obviously. Syracuse shot 63% from the field. I don't know that Virginia Tech shoots 63% from the field. But one thing you also have to consider, UNC has been dominated at home. Like obviously lost to Clemson at home, and that was, somewhat of a post-Duke hangover to me. I didn't expect them to lose that game, and they should not have lost that game, but I think that's a lot of what that was. But this team has been on the road a long time, and I think they need to, certainly get this one at home, especially because they have the midweek bye. And I don't mean to jump ahead too much, but I was kind of looking at it. UNC does need to go ahead and just get this one to get to 12-3 in the league, because if you look at the other two teams behind them, you have Duke and UVA. So UNC is 11-3, Duke is 10-3, UVA is 10-4. So in the time between now and next Saturday, if UNC wins this game, they'd be 10-3, and they would need to be, because Duke has 2 games in between there. Not gimmies. It's at FSU and at Miami. Teams they're better than, but, obviously road games against teams that gave UNC a bit of a fight. So if Duke won both of those games, they'd also be 12-3. UNC has a tiebreaker over Duke. Virginia in that same stretch has Wake and at Virginia Tech. They have Wake and Virginia Tech in a 2-day span, so they have the Saturday, Monday. If they won both of those games, they would actually be 12-4. So if UNC loses on Saturday and they go 11-4, they would actually be behind Duke at 12-3, and they would be behind a 12-4 Virginia team. So this game has a lot of implications, as a lot of these games do down the stretch, for UNC, and Virginia Tech's not the easiest team to face, but it's one that, considering they're at home and considering that they need a win, it was one that I think you would probably expect UNC to come out and win, and also, I would say play pretty well.
The other guys, I want to ask you the same thing. What do you think North Carolina is getting from a Virginia Tech team? And again, you can see things from all of the middle of the pack ACC teams. You can see things that you can like from a lot of those squads. I would ask you, Evan, I'll come to you next. What do you expect about Virginia Tech this Saturday in Chapel Hill?
Yeah, I think Jeremiah hit on it, their ability to shoot. I mean, you've got Sean Petula and Hunter Couture starting, who are really good shooters, and then obviously Tyler Nickel. I think the interesting thing for UNC is going to be a lot of the talk, throughout the whole year has been the short backcourt that UNC has with Cadeau and RJ Davis. And Virginia Tech is actually a fairly decent matchup defensively for UNC. I mean, Padula is listed 6'1". He's probably 6 foot. Couture is not a tall guy. I think he's 6'3". MJ Collins, who their third guard is, I think is 6'4" or 6'3". I mean, these are not, your Florida States of the world, or you kind of saw Judah Mintz and JJ Starling kind of using their size and athleticism advantage the other night. But yeah, I mean, I think this team, in order for Virginia Tech to come in and win, it's going to be a product of either or, probably Padula or Couture going off, and they're both capable of doing that. And I think
Adam,
that's kind of the big thing for Virginia Tech.
Adam, anything you want to pick off the bones? I know you're typically a good cleanup hitter in these senses. So what do you expect to see from the same question from Virginia Tech as they stroll into the Dean Dome?
I do like to pick the bones too, Joey. I like some good flavor. Also, the chat tonight, the live chat, electric as always. I feel like there's been some people making some good points over there. I was scrolling through as the guys were talking. Clint Moses making good points. Garrett Chapman, my man. Lewis Bass. M. Barnes, 915. Sean Crowley, always. Some good points being made over there. I would say about Virginia Tech, you know what? Virginia Tech will come to Chapel Hill. Do you know how many road wins they have this season? They have one. They have won all of one road game, true road game.
Wow.
And that was at NC State, actually. So this is a team that has not had the success that UNC has had on the road. And, the Sean Padula dynamic is interesting because he's a fine player and he's capable of having some really nice games. Had a nice game against UNC in Blacksburg last year when Armando didn't play and Carolina got beat up there in the ACC opener, day after the ACC football championship game. But there's something about Sean Padula. I don't know if you guys have noticed it. He tends to piss people off. Like the opponents that Virginia Tech plays, you see them. The other guards love to go at him, and they love that. It's always something extra going on. Like.
Didn't he have something? Didn't he have some dust up with Duke when they played up there a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, right. I don't know if it's his choir boy thing he's got going on, or if he's a big smack talker. But there's always something a little extra. But he's among the ACC leaders in assists. But also, if you look at his turnover numbers, I think he has 84. I looked at it earlier. I think he has 84 turnovers on the season. I remember seeing a stat. They lost to Notre Dame recently. Virginia Tech did, which is,
that's
not a game you want to lose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he had 6 turnovers in that game. I mean, Couture, as we all know, can shoot the lights out of it. The last time I covered for work a non-UNC basketball game, I covered the Virginia Tech Duke ACC championship game in Brooklyn. And when I was at the end of the newspaper run, when Couture went for 31, thought I was going to be writing a Duke story that night for my readership. Ended up being a Hunter Couture goes crazy, in Brooklyn, and denies Coach K an ACC championship. It was a hell of a game, but yeah, I mean, Couture can shoot it. Lynn Kidd's not a bad player. But I mean, this is a game Carolina should win. This is a game Carolina needs to win. It's a proverbial get right game. They need to win this game. They don't need to be messing around. They need to win this game, get into that break, and heal up.
Yeah, they'll have the crowd behind them. If nothing else, you have seen with the Saturday games this year that the home folks in Carolina Blue have absolutely brought their yelling voices for home games on a Saturday. And I want to thank Jeremiah for going through the ACC stats a second ago. That half game lead against Duke looms large when you're getting ready to have a week off. And like you said, Jeremiah, it does mean something when they're going on the road. And of course, the Tar Heels do have games left against both Virginia Duke, the return match at home against Miami, NC State, and then what am I missing? I'm missing another one. Either way, that's
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. That's right. Which is not going to, earlier this year when we were worrying about the net, that gave a lot of people some heartburn. I don't think that's going to be this sense anymore, because I do think even with the slide, this team is squarely going to be a top 4 seed somewhere. And gosh knows if they do decide to straighten some things back up and start, getting right, to use your phrase from a second ago, Adam. I do think that there is still a chance they could end up on a 1 line. There's a lot of basketball left to play, guys, and I think that's something that that folks need to pay attention to. The committee usually, and I don't know how things are going to go now, because God knows Lunardi's got his platform and he's shouting from the rooftops how terrible the ACC is. But I still think if the winner of the ACC tournament is either North Carolina or Duke, I think there's a chance that one of those could sneak into the 1 line. But, a lot of basketball left to play. A lot of other things have to happen. So just, hang tight and see what's what. Boys, you have anything you want to throw out to our folks before we start answering some questions? I did get a couple that I want to get before we get out of here.
Don't forget who the vice chair of the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee is this season. One Bubba Cunningham.
One Mr. Cunningham, yes. And so hopefully he will have better luck with him than another athletic director had on the CFP committee recently. Okay, so questions, and I will pepper you guys with them. First one from Thomas Yancey: with more zone defense being utilized against the Heels, do you think Washington would have been a better option in the middle of the zone? Jeremiah, I'll come to you with that one.
Glad to take that one for sure. I think that's actually a solid idea. Like, if you wanted to put Washington toward that top of the key, he's actually shown that he's, a pretty solid, jump shooter, as a big man. So you could, just kind of let him kind of get right there. But what I will say, though, they had Elliot Cadeau there a lot against Syracuse. Like, they actually would put Elliot Cadeau near, kind of top of the key. Obviously, our depth perception was kind of interesting, but it was around top of the key, around the elbow. And they actually had some pretty good looks with him getting to Armando Bacot in the paint. I wish they would have probably did that more. I thought they probably could have got Armando more touches in that situation. But I think Jalen Washington would be a good option if you just wanted to make him a threat, as a jump shooter. He doesn't take a ton of them in a given game, so it might be a rhythm thing as well. But I could see that being a good option, and I think the in-game adjustment to put Elliott there actually was pretty smart. It almost worked for him as far as a win, but
I love that.
I think it's a good option.
I loved it. It was sexy, and I think if Elliott hadn't, he pushed a couple of the looks that he had right around the ACC logo. If he hits a couple of those, it absolutely changes the game, I believe. But Adam, I've got a follow-up for you, also from Thomas Yancey. In your opinion, what is keeping Washington from getting more minutes? I know his defense on fives is shaky.
I think he needs more minutes. I think Jalen Washington needs more minutes. I think Jalen Withers needs more minutes. I think Seth Trimble needs more minutes. Just to be able to max out what I think this team is capable of, and that's making a deep NCAA tournament run. There's going to be moments where they need everyone. But with Jalen Washington specifically, I think that's an interesting idea about putting him at the soft spot of the zone. Pete Nance had a very big scoring game at Syracuse last year because he caught the ball at the free throw line, and he could either shoot a free throw line jumper or take a dribble and shoot a little floater. I mean, he was over 20 points. And the other night at Syracuse, Washington hit a corner three off an inbounds, I believe. I think he had 5 points. So
they left him wide open, and he absolutely canned one from the wing. You're spot on.
And then, they don't play him the rest of the second half or whatever it was. Armando's knee, we're talking to Armando after the game. Go watch the video. I think it's like 7,000 people have watched it on YouTube. Armando's like, yeah, I hurt, my knee tightened up somehow. So he's limping through the second half, and Jalen Washington's not in the game. But I have been, and Jeremiah and Evan and I have sort of looked at each other a couple times. There have been some moments in recent games, FSU, Syracuse, maybe BC. There was another one where Jalen Washington has had these monster dunks in traffic where it's been like, where did that come from? But to what Thomas is saying, yeah, I mean, Jalen does have these times where he just looks so weak on defense. And you're reminded of the long road he has had to travel just to get into this sort of shape. I mean, it's been such all the knee injuries and the surgeries. So, but I think, I think at a certain point, you just got to play him more and live with the fact that, it might not be the prettiest. Maybe you got to play him more and make sure he doesn't get in the transfer portal. We have no intel on
Oh,
that.
come on now. Don't be throwing grenades into the chat like that, sir.
But you know what I mean? Like,
It's a valid point.
I think, I don't know. I think Hubert Davis's staff certainly knows a little bit more about college basketball than I do, but I think you got to just get them out there because you're looking at this. You're looking at this as a 40-game season, not a 33-game season. You're looking at this the full, across the board, and I just think he's deserving of more. And sure, there are going to be some mistakes. It's not going to be pretty, but if you're putting less miles on Armando or Harrison Ingram, I think that's also a good thing. But that's just my 2 cents.
I think you make a great point there with Withers, and the fact, I think one of the struggles that he has, and if you talk to folks who watch a lot of basketball, I think one of the things that not Withers, Washington struggles with is his lateral quickness. I think he's a great rim protector and he's got good shot blocking instincts. But if you notice when he's playing against smaller guys that are able to kind of move and kind of force him to play laterally, he gets beat really bad. And that's something that was not going to work for him against Syracuse because Malik Brown was stepping outside the 3-point line and getting shots and putting the ball on the floor a couple times. I agree with you, Adam. Great points about how those guys can get some more minutes. Evan, I got a question for you, sir, from the chat from earlier. This is a hypothetical, but our guy M. Barnes says, did this team struggle become more prominent when Hubert said he never told Mondo that this was RJ's team? So put that in a little context. There was this big to-do made after the Georgia Tech game about, Hubert found out that Armando felt like he was trying to defer to RJ Davis, et cetera, et cetera. And if you'll remember, all over the Inside Carolina message boards and social media, what everybody was like, well, why isn't Armando more involved? Let's get him more involved. Let's do more for Armando. Barnes makes a great point here that the offense has taken a little bit of a tank from an efficiency standpoint since Armando's point total came up. So I want to ask you, Evan Rogers, what do you think about said question?
I would say it's more just coincidence in terms of that information being out and kind of this lull happening. I would say the reason they're struggling is kind of what I hit on earlier. It's their defense has taken quite a noticeable drop the last couple of games. I can't think of many times, especially in these last couple of games, like in the Syracuse game or the Miami game, even the Clemson game or Duke game, where I thought Armando was forcing the action offensively for himself inside. I think for the most part, he has still played within his role, even though he is getting more shots than what he was probably 3 weeks ago. And I still think a guy like RJ Davis is obviously still putting up points. And I still think for the most part, he's kind of playing within the offense and getting the same shots that he was getting at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's more of a timing coincidence that statement is said or that conversation is said and they end up having a lull. But I think that more has to do with the team's overall defensive play dropping, especially these last 3 games compared to, Armando Bacot being a focus of the offense. Because I still don't think he's 1A. I mean, I think that's clearly still RJ, even though he has struggled kind of to start a couple of these games. You can tell when it gets into crunch time mode or even when they're trying to man these comebacks that they've had to do in the second half, a lot of the times it's with RJ Davis, hitting threes or getting to the free throw line or something like that.
Adam, I want to ask you, do you remember the old Dean Smith quote about what's the best thing about freshmen?
They become sophomores. Is that it?
I think we're seeing intern Evan become a veteran here right in front of our eyes. He's no longer an intern. He's a full on just veteran contributor scholarship player right now, and it's fun to see.
He is the best. He is our guy. We're going to need, in my opinion, we're going to need to up the NIL money.
Did you just Corey Alexander him?
We're going to need to up the NIL money for the Evan's senior year coming up. I would love if we could put together a package to keep him on after his senior year.
Hold that thought. I have an idea how we can do that. if you go to congruityhr/Tar Heels,
Oh.
they'll tell you how you can save some money on running your medium and small business. And you can take that money, contribute it to the Evan Rogers NIL collective to get Evan to stick around for his senior year. Now that's next level. Real talk. The folks over at Congruity are absolutely great. They started, looking outside of the state of North Carolina, but they focused on the state of North Carolina, and they want local businesses in this state to do really well. They want small and medium-sized businesses to be able to grow and thrive and make a strong state economy. And you can do that. You can help them do that. And you can do that with your business by going to congruityhr/Tar Heels. What they'll do, go to that link, they'll give you a free assessment of your business and tell you how they can save you some money, how they can help you optimize, get rid of some of the pressured things that are distracting you and keeping you from focusing on growth and scalability. They'll help you with your HR, your admin, your benefits, all the kind of stuff that really kind of sucks the life out of you as a small and medium-sized business owner. Go to Congruity HR. Let them help you out. We appreciate their support of this here show. They're great folks. We're very, very grateful for them and their contributions to Inside Carolina, just like I am grateful to Jeremiah Holloway and Evan Rogers and Adam Smith for their contributions to this here on the Beat Show tonight. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate everybody in the chat, the folks that have been with us. We've had about a $1.50 hanging around tonight, and for me as a substitute teacher, I'm grateful for that. They didn't walk in and see the guest preacher and immediately turn back and go get in their car out in the parking lot, right? I'm grateful for y'all for bringing all the insight tonight. Shout out to everybody who's been a part of the show. We will catch you next time, and shout out to John Bauman for producing. We will talk to all of you sometime very soon. Adam, Jeremiah, Evan will all have the content after the Virginia Tech game on Saturday. You can check them out on InsideCarolina.com. But until the next time, we will talk to you soon. This has been On the Beat on InsideCarolina.com.